Duper, and here on the breakdown, we deep dive local politics, mainly school boards and local municipalities like city councils. But any and all Johnson County politics are on the table. We air Mondays at 5 p.m. You can visit Joco Community Radio Facebook page to watch shows live or see replays. Also, you can go to www.jococommunityradio.com where Apple and Android apps are available. Tune in to get the ins and outs of Johnson County, Texas. Welcome to our second Thursday show in our new time slot. Our original time slot was Mondays at 5, and that proved counterproductive due to the fact that a large number of meetings are on Mondays. Our goal is to attend and participate in these meetings, engage the community's elected officials and civil servants, and we encourage all citizens to familiarize yourself with these meetings, their processes, and to try to understand local governance. So tonight we have a few topics on the table. First, we're going to review the September 18th Joshua ISD School Board meeting. It's the first meeting that we were able to attend since we moved to our new time slot. And we're going to talk about the good and the bad regarding the school board and how they conduct their meetings. We're going to discuss the Joshua ISD 2023 bond, which will be on the November 7th ballot, where it is at, the good and the bad regarding that. And we're going to discuss the bond rollout and what does the public want to see in regards to the transparency regarding how they're going to spend about $107 million. We're going to discuss the city of Godley, specifically the city council, and discuss Godley ISD and their standing up of a long-range facility planning committee to push a bond most likely in May. And we're going to end the show, hopefully most of the second segment, on the muddiness of MUDs. Do you know what a MUD is? It's a municipal utility district. They're coming to Texas with some recent legislation over the last few legislative cycles, and they're slowly beginning to creep their ugly heads in here. And you need to understand how these affect your communities, these rural communities here in Johnson County, and how people are going to get filthy, filthy rich off these MUDs. We're going to recap the public hearing that was in Cleburne regarding a new MUD that's coming into Godley. And it's one of many coming to Godley. Then there's some in other communities in Johnson County. And you guys really need to start paying attention to these MUDs because they're going to transform your communities much faster and without the other infrastructure than what the MUDs provide. And it's going to really, really tax some of these smaller municipalities. So to start off today's show, we begin in Joshua. So I attended the Joshua ISD School Board meeting last Monday, and I want to talk about some of the positives and some of the negatives with how they conduct their meetings. First, so what Joshua does is they structure their meetings where they front load what is called a board work session. So what is a board work session? So for those of you that don't know what a board work session is and you want to see your elected officials actually doing some work, these are great places to go. Some school boards tend to do very little or almost nothing in board work sessions, and they do most of it in executive, which is a no-no, but they do it anyways. Other school boards like Joshua does a board work session before every meeting that the public can attend. That is where you will see a lot of Q&A from your elected officials to the school board, trying to get them to understand a lot of what's going on. They're very good. Joshua does theirs 1 hour before their school board meetings, and the public is able to attend those. They also allow public comment, and they allow you public comment at the time that they're discussing the what will be on the agenda for the regular meetings. So it allows you, as a member of the public, to enter into the discussion when the board of trustees is actually talking about this stuff. So if you have input on anything that happens to be on their agenda, this is a great, great tool to use to engage your elected officials. Also, Joshua, another positive that they do, they have every school district has BED, legal and local policy, and this involves how the public can interact with the school board trustees. Some ISDs, like Godley, use BED local policy, in my opinion, inappropriately outside of legislative intent to stifle and to prevent the public from engaging their school board officials. Joshua actually uses it as it's intended. So Region 11 has 76 school districts in it, and 71 of those districts appropriately use and are within the legislative intent of BED local, which lets you, as a member of the public, go into these meetings and speak on anything that you want to speak on. And the beautiful thing with that is that it doesn't have to be on an agenda item. Other ISDs that want to stifle free speech, like Godley ISD, will stop you and prevent you from speaking on it unless they, as a school board, choose to put it on the agenda. Another thing that is positive about how Joshua runs their meetings is they place the minutes of the previous meeting on their website. So why is this important? Well, the minutes are the official record of what happened in those school board meetings, and they are subject to open records, and they're supposed to be basically provided on demand. It will show you how your trustees voted and what came out of the topics that they were considering. Joshua forward thinks and puts these on their website. And what that does is it prevents excess legal fees and excess tying up of staff in regards to something that is going to be is subject to open records at any time. So they get ahead of that and they put it on there. They also allow open comments and comments on the agenda items. I do think that in the regular portion of the meeting, which is the 6:30 p.m. meeting on at Joshua ISD, they should allow a topic that's being discussed on an agenda item by the public to be discussed at consideration for that agenda item instead of front loading it. That's just a small nuance. I think that when the elected officials are considering something that they're going to vote for, that the public's input is right at the time they're deciding that, not well before it. So I do wish they would change that, but they still do allow that, and they give a decent amount of time for it, and they also allow open comments. So it's kind of a positive and somewhat of what I wish it would like to see them changed. Another thing they do that's pretty cool, but I don't know if it's consistent and it would be hard to validate this, is on some public comments that people make, they will, on their website, they have a section that is called School Board Meeting Public Forum Comments and Responses, where they will actually give an official school district response to an item that an individual public member is speaking on at their meetings. If this is done consistently with all public input, it's great. If it's selective, then that's just not cool. So hopefully they're doing it consistently. Hopefully that continues, and hopefully they drive people that commented in open forum to that portion of their website. One last thing they do that's pretty positive is their executive session. So for those of you that don't know what executive session is, there's valid reasons for that. Personnel issues, certain real estate transactions, disciplinary issues. There's certain things that go in executive session. Joshua does this at the very, very end of their meeting, and they have to reconvene an open session afterwards. But by doing it at the very, very end of their meeting, it allows the majority of business to be conducted, and it respects people's time. If you see an ISD, which Godley has a bad habit of doing this, they'll front load executive, and it's to deter people from coming to the meetings. In my opinion, why would you immediately go behind closed doors for an extended period of time while everybody's waiting for you? So that's bonus points for that. So there are some improvements that Joshua ISD could make, in my opinion. And I'm going to go through some of those right now and explain why. So when a school board or a city council, for this matter too, any elected body is about to have an open meeting, their municipality or the actual for an ISD, the school district will provide what is called a board book. That is the documents that they're using to make their decisions during those discussion times. Those are usually very, very lengthy. Some ISDs that are very, very transparent release the board book with the agenda item 72 hours before the meeting. This accomplishes a lot of things. It lets the public see what the school board members are seeing. Obviously, things that meet the executive criteria are pulled out, but it lets people see what they're seeing, and a lot of times it'll answer questions for them. So another reason to do this is these are also subject to open records. And every time somebody commits and has to fill out an open record for something that should be easily available, It taxes school district employees and potentially runs it through a legal team, which is not good. We don't want to inadvertently, artificially, unnecessarily inflate legal fees for something that should be easily provided. So I would like to see Joshua release the board book documents with the agenda items. Financials. Joshua has some of their financials on their website, which is great. But I would really, really love to see the check registry on their website. Alito does this. A lot of ISDs do this. They put the actual check registry on their website. It prevents open records again. Unnecessary legal fees are avoided, and it automatically eliminates the argument that you're trying to hide something. For example, I believe Joshua ISD said they had 72 pages of check registries. Obviously, it's the beginning of the school year. They're spending a lot of money to get things up and running for the new year, but that's a lot of taxpayer money going out that is easily accessible if they put it on their website. And anytime anybody asks for, hey, how are you spending your money? Hey guys, go right here and look at this. It would be really good to see all the open records, the financials that are subject to open records on the website. One last thing I would love to see is during the board work sessions, the school district is talking about things and the school board members are looking on their computers. In the past, it's been a while, but they used to place what they were looking at up on an overhead projector so the public attending the board work sessions could see what was being referred to. It would be awesome if they would go back to putting the information up on the overhead so the public could see this instead of hearing a discussion but not being able to have a full understanding of what's being talked about. So those are some positives and negatives of the Joshua ISD school board meeting. They're pretty decent in how they do most of their meetings. I have to give them some credit there. They're overwhelmingly more transparent than Godley. Granted, Godley is about as oppressive as a communist country, but that's a whole nother argument for another day. But it is nice to see that Joshua, at least for a lot of things, is really trying to be transparent as possible. And they do not run from open comments. So if you're interested in Joshua ISD school board meetings, consider attending a board work session. They're in the back room behind the regular meetings, and there's a lot more discussion, and you get a lot more insight on the day-to-day operations and what the district is asking the school board trustees to decide on. So hopefully people can start attending those. And now we'll move on to the Joshua ISD Bond 2023. So bonds are hot topics. These are emotional topics for a lot of people, and it draws delineating lines a lot of times. And before we dive into what we do know about this bond, we still need to know a lot more. I want to encourage the greater Joshua community to leave your emotions at the door on these bonds. Frame your argument for or against the bond on facts. We all don't have to agree. It's okay to disagree, but make sure that you're not bringing emotional baggage into the conversation and using guilt to try to make your point. If somebody's making an argument, attack their argument if you disagree with it. Don't attack them personally. There's no reason to do that. Some examples of that overcrowded classrooms. Oh, we're going to have 45, 50 kids to a classroom. Hey, there's protections in place. There's things that happen that prevent overcrowding of classrooms. And the reality is if Joshua ISD or any ISD goes to 50 kids to a classroom, there's a lot of factors that go into that. Failure of a bond might be one. Also, failure to plan is another one. So hearing things like, oh, your kids are going to be in dilapidated tornado attracting portables. Don't use these type of emotional arguments when somebody's making a point on responsible stewardship of taxpayer money. So try to keep away from some of these emotions when you decide to work through the bond thing. Facebook civility, the kind of um, pivoting off what I just discussed, frame your argument well, clear, and on point. Don't attack the messenger, attack the message, attack the issues, and leave cute emojis at the door. I love the family members of people that are pro one side or the other that'll LOL with little emojis down below. It's really cute. But let me tell you something. When I see a family member of somebody I know that's pushing the bond, um, completely disrespecting valid arguments that way, it doesn't sit well. If you have an argument for or against the bond, good or bad, 100% make those arguments and attack the message, not the messenger. Don't take people's concerns not seriously. So the reality is whether you're for a bond or against a bond, it's fair to say that nobody's going to be against the bond because they hate kids. So I think everybody wants the best for kids. We just all have different ways to get there. Passing a bond via guilt is reckless. This is a lot of money. So focus on what's most important. What do the kids need to learn? Let's break it down into what they absolutely need. And then if we have excess and we want to throw in some bells and whistles, well, so be it. But let's focus on that specifically. So there's reasons to support a bond. There's reasons to not support a bond. But the reality is we all want what's best for kids. It's just how do we get there? The opportunity is good, and bonds can facilitate some of the needs, but they need it. But the whoever's asking for a bond, asking to finance substantial amount of of uh, um of upgrades to facilities, new facilities, they need to really justify um really justify why that's important. There's responsible debt, and then there's a good idea fairy. And if the good idea fairy creeps into these bond propositions to where it's massive amounts of bells and whistles, for example, on Godley ISD's bond, they literally had a 2-story climate controlled covered sky bridge from the high school to the stadium. That is not that's a good idea fairy. There's no need for that for student learning. So I think that got cut. I'm not sure, but validate the need for a bond with the absolute needs of what's going to facilitate the best learner outcomes. Don't hold people's opinions over their heads, but because the reality is debt is not good. It's not healthy for society. It's not healthy for taxpayers. And we got to be really careful every time that debt's considered. Yes, it's a traditional way of adding new facilities, but here again, there's responsible debt. Leave the good idea fairy out of it. Hopefully, Joshua ISD did that. We really don't know yet. They have a list of what they're doing, but not how they're spending their money on it. They really need to get a little bit more transparent on that. I think they're going to. But here again, we need to quantify this down to needs versus wants. The Joshua ISD leadership, they have an obligation to make sure that we know how all that money is going to be spent. Love them or hate them. Do you trust them to make the do you trust them to make the right decisions for the right people? At the same time, if you're against the bond, try to figure out if you can justify like if you're going to be for a bond, make sure you're not just punishing somebody you don't like in regards to that. Now, if you don't trust that the decisions are being made appropriately, well, there may be a thing for that. Without and let me use Godley as another example. Without drastic change to their bond proposal, which was the 6th largest bond in the state last election cycle, without a drastic, excuse my French, but coming to Jesus moment with how they're spending taxpayer money, I can't support anything they're doing without a leadership change, or at least a dramatic change in their leadership direction, because they've shown that they care a heck of a lot more about just getting as much as they can, opposed to getting what's needed for best learner outcomes. They are already in debt well above the state average, and their outcomes are nowhere near the state average. So they have a lot of progress to make as far as I'm concerned. But so trust for the leadership and who's making these decisions could factor into that decision making. Just make sure it's not personal, however you're doing it. So we're gonna we're going to dive in a little bit to the actual scope of this bond. What do we know about it? So the specifics is it's $107,140,000 that they want to go into debt for to build some new facilities and expand some and do some upgrades that we'll deep dive here in a minute. Their last bond was approximately $94 million, and that failed. That failed. This one's a little bit more, whether that's inflation, whether they've added some things. I don't know. I know that some of the things in the old bond, like vestibules, security vestibules and stuff, have been paid for with alternative funding measures. So I don't know why this bond is more, because we haven't really gotten a line item with monetary values on it. Hopefully that will be forthcoming. That might answer a lot of these questions. But the reality is that $107 million is going to cost taxpayers $184 million when you factor in interest at the interest rate that Joshua ISD is proposing, which is a 4.5% interest rate, which is actually a really, really good interest rate. If they can get that, props to them. Last bond cycle, most districts were factoring in about 5.5 to 5.8, which would substantially raise this amount. If this bond passes, and once they call all the bonds with the debt they currently have, they would be $313 million total in debt. It's a lot of debt. So here again, there's times when you might need to use debt, and you can't say that, all debt's necessarily bad, but you really have to justify this. This is taxpayer money. This is 30 years of financing. Kids that are in school right now are going to spend a large amount of their adult life paying off this debt. Okay. We also have to factor in things like how many more bonds in the next 10, 12 years are going to be needed. So Joshua can make up a lot of ground here if they talk about a long-term plan where they're saying, hey, we know that we're going to need a bond in 5 years, 6 years, 8 years. Here again, not to beat up on Godley too much, but they made some horrible mistakes. Their $168 million bond in 2021, they sold the community that they weren't going to need another bond till 2026. Well, they called one 2 years later in 2023. So being able to validate the needs to the community and stick to those promises or declarations are very important when you talk about trust, asking the community to trust you and how you pay for these bonds. So you really, really need to pay attention, Joshua ISD, on how you can earn and build and maintain the public's trust in how you're spending their money. It's super, super important. So the they're talking, how are they trying to sell this bond? They want to keep up with growth. They want to expand career and technical education. They want district-wide upgrades. They want safety and security, and they want future school sites. Those are the 5 main points that they're talking about on their website, which is, I think, Joshua ISD Bond 2023. If I remember right, they have an actual website. So keep up with growth, expand career technical education, district-wide upgrades, safety and security, and future school sites. So keep up with growth. All right. So one thing that would help people potentially is if they knew where Joshua ISD stands now. I've heard numerous times that they're overcrowded, but hearing a max capacity of each school and where the enrollment is now in that school would help the public see if they're really as crowded as they say they are. Zonda Education was a company that they use for their demographic report, and their most recent demographic report is from July 12th, 2023. So in that July 12th, 2023, Joshua ISD had an enrollment of 5,898 students. So they're about 6,000 students. And I think they went over 6,000. I think at their most recent school board meeting, they just peaked over 6,000. But this demo report, this July 12th demo report, says by 2033 they expect an enrollment of 7,210 students. So they expect in 10 years to add 1,312 students. These are their numbers. This is on their bond website and then in their demographic report. And they're saying that they expect 1,312 students in about a 10-year period. So about 130 students per kid. Most new elementary schools have about a max capacity of between 700 and 800, about 740, I think is what a lot of them are factoring in now. So, and that's just elementary. So in 10 years, they're going to about double that amount, but that's not factoring in middle school and high school, et cetera. So we're going to talk about the difference of what to look at in some of these demographic reports and houses being built versus enrollment when we get back from our break. Thanks for joining us on the breakdown. We'll keep deep diving this Joshua stuff. We'll be back in a few. Thanks, Joko.
Have you ever met a single person in your life that enjoys paying taxes? No, no one does. If you can't sleep at night because you have a huge problem with the IRS, I've got some free advice for you. This service is strictly limited to individuals that owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes. And if you qualify, we can guarantee that you won't be writing a big fat check to the IRS, or our services cost you nothing. The first 100 people that call today will get a free tax consultation worth $500. Stop worrying about your IRS problem. We can help you, we promise. Call the tax doctor right now. I mean right now to learn more.
800-240-4587. 800-240-4587. 800-240-4587. That's 800-240-4587.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395.
Welcome back to the breakdown here in Joko, Johnson County, where we deep dive local politics, school boards, and city council specifically. We're talking about Joshua, how they run their school board meetings, Joshua's bond proposal, what we want to see. We're getting ready to talk about Godley standing up a long-range facility planning committee and deep dive MUDs. These MUDs are dangerous, guys. They're scary, scary, scary. But before we move on to our second segment, let's talk about how Joko Community Radio is proud to be the voice of Johnson County, Texas. It's live 24/7 on the TuneIn Radio Network, tuneinjoko.com. That's www.tuneinjoko.com. It's the place to find all the ways to listen and watch. And the station app is also available for free on Android and Apple devices. Simply search your store. Check out our lineup and more at www.jokocommunityradio.com. This episode and more brought to you by Next Level Claims, making your insurance work for you. Reach out to the Texas sales rep at 844-TEX-HAIL. That's 844-839-4245 for all your claims for making insurance work for you. And also be sure to dress your arms and more at thetiffy.com. So back here to talk a little bit about what we know about Joshua's ISD bond that they're calling the $107 million bond, $184 million total with principal and interest. So we just went over the demographic report, and to rehash that, Joshua is stating their demographic report that they'll add about 1,300 students in a 10-year period. So let's talk about how there gets to be a lot of confusion here in some of these demo reports. So demo reports will always talk about the number of residences that's going to be added. And the reason they're doing that is because that's tax money. So the more houses that go in, the more apartments that go in, condos, townhomes, any type of multifamily, anything that goes in, it generate, you take rural land, you convert it to housing, it creates tax revenue. So a lot of times you'll hear a district, Godley loves to talk about, 30% growth, 35% growth. Well, they're talking about houses added to your tax rolls. They're not talking about enrollment growth. So enrollment growth directly impacts what a district can budget through average daily attendance, weighted average daily attendance. Their budget is significantly impacted by enrollment. Enrollment goes up super, super fast. Their budget can increase super, super fast. Their budget goes down super, super fast. Their budget can decrease super, super fast on an annual basis. Also, it's important to think, do not think for a second that a school district gets 100% of the property tax money that it generates. That money gets routed through the state of Texas, and the legislature has all this criteria that needs to be met, and it trickles back down based on certain things that the municipalities or the school districts do. So the reality is a school district's budget and what they can actually budget has a a high and a low limit, and they have to fit within that. And there's a lot of factors that go into that, enrollment being one. So when a community is trying to talk about so many houses, Godley is notorious for this. We have all these houses coming. We're going to be flush with money. If their enrollment doesn't match the houses coming in, they don't get all that money. Don't think for a second that they get all that money. Also, don't think for a second that Joshua and Godley both are not pulling money outside of their footprint. They're not recapture districts. They're not generating enough property tax revenue to fund the school districts now based on how they run their districts with enrollment and the programs they have. So there's a lot of factors that go into this, but don't let houses and future homes and residences make you think that there's an overwhelming amount of money that's necessarily available to the school districts. It's kind of a complicated facet, but they're not directly correlated. So enough about that's the keep up with the growth part of the Joshua ISD bond. So let's talk about expand the Career and Technical Education Center. This is CTE. So Joshua ISD receives a lot of money in CTA from the state allotments. The reality is that the more kids you have in CTE programs, the more money you receive from the state. Think of special ed. If kids that are in special ed, there's money for each kid in special ed, more money. So you have a basic amount that a child enrolled in schools that the school district gets, then a basic amount of money. The more things or programs that they're enrolled in, that equates to more money. So Joshua ISD, every ISD gets money for the amount of students enrolled in CTE. They're already receiving that. So there is a reason to push kids into CTE. Is that good or bad? Well, it depends. If you're not abusing the CTE program with kind of fluff, and you're really focused on working with some of these students to make sure that they have a really, really super solid, advanced foundational core education foundation before you drive them down this CTE road, that can be considered very responsible. However, if you're driving them prematurely down a CTE road because it's more money, that's not responsible. And you could be closing off some barriers. I can't speak for what Joshua does or how they do it. I'd like to think that they do it responsibly, and hopefully they do. But there's definitely some value with CTE. However, it can't come at the expense of lowering opportunity or limiting opportunity long-term for students. And I want you to think about, put yourself in high school. So many kids in high school, they're just at an immature age. They're going through puberty. They're just not responsible enough to make the best decision and use the time given to them in school to make the best decisions. A lot of kids are going to choose path of least resistance. I am an example of that. I purposely stopped taking math, English, sciences as soon as I was able to do that. And I took easy courses to cruise in high school. I didn't have an adult in the room telling me and mandating that I did the important, responsible thing and took full advantage of that. So as long as CTE is not allowing that to happen, that's a good thing. If it is allowing that to happen, that's a bad thing. So they're talking about expanding culinary arts, cosmetology, health science, information tech, and engineering. So that's what they're saying the bond money is going to be used for. Those all sound like great things. And what are they going to actually do for CTE? Well, they're going to renovate their existing 26,000 square foot CTE facility, and they're going to add an additional 31,000 square feet to their to the existing CTE facility. So they're expanding a 26,000 square foot facility to more than double, and that is a total of 57,000 square feet. To put into perspective, that's just smaller than a football field. A football field is 57,600 square feet. So culinary arts, commercial kitchens, cosmetology, a beauty salon, and that type of stuff, health science, information tech, and engineering is going to have about a football field worth of size to it. Now, if there's more to CTE than they do there that I don't know about, that's fair to say, but this is what Joshua's releasing to the public that they're looking to do with their CTE program with this bond. So that's a ton of space. And here again, CTE can't limit opportunity for kids, because how many of us really know what we want to do for the rest of our lives in high school? So as long as the kids aren't artificially or inadvertently limited to other options post high school, CTE can be a good thing. But we really have to make sure that kids are making the responsible decisions and the best decision for their long-term future. We also need to make sure CTE is in a recession and just a modernization proof career. If they're in something now that's going to be, AI is going to take over, robotics is going to take over, and stuff like that, you have to factor stuff like that in too. If they need a career change midlife, do they have the basic foundations to take advantage of that? That's something that really needs to be looked at too. So moving on, trying to go faster, got a lot to cover. District-wide upgrades. So they're saying they want to replace some HVACs, do some roof work, and expand some pavement. Very limited information on that. Those are all important things. So really would love to see some dollar amounts to what you're doing with that and the scope of those projects to see if this is money well spent. If you're replacing two HVACs and a couple classrooms of roofs and 100 square feet of pavement, and that's not very much. If you're doing massive amounts of that work, then it's not. So this is where Joshua ISD can help earn some trust of the community by line iteming the how you're going to spend this taxpayer money. Safety and security, fire alarms, PA system, vape detectors, and cameras. Can't really argue with most of that. Those are needed in schools. I don't know the condition of what that stuff is now, so it's hard to say if it needs to be upgraded or not. Here again, we should always look at needs before wants. Make sure the needs are taken care of, and before you move on to bells and whistles. Locker rooms for cheer and color guard. Don't know. Would love to hear what the condition is now and why they think they need an upgrade. Stage and seating in an auditorium. Would love to see why they feel that that's deficient, and what you need to be upgraded to. Like I said, Godley ISD, which has 40% socioeconomically disadvantaged population, decided to go to TCU, a very, very expensive, affluent private university, to build their athletic facilities off. Out of proportion, in my opinion. They're beautiful facilities, but they're more for adult ego than for how well a kid's going to perform in any of those sports. So, I would love to see how Joshua is saying that they really, really need this. So we're still waiting to see detailed information. The rollout's been kind of slow. And we want a line item cost, for each section of the bond. It would really help answer a lot of these questions. The good news is, on Wednesday, September 7th, they're having a Facebook Live event with the superintendent. He's saying that he's going to answer all questions, and he's taking questions in advance and questions the day of. Hopefully, he'll answer all questions. Here again, Godley ISD loves to have you submit questions, and nobody knows if they're really answering all the questions or just the questions that they want to pre-select. Hopefully they'll be really transparent with this and ask some of the really hard questions. And then Thursday, September 28th, Wednesday, September 27th is the Facebook Live group, not the 7th. We're past that. September 27th. And then the day after, Thursday, September 28th, in the administration building, there's an in-person Q&A where you can go in and talk about that. So, really, really need to make sure that this is prioritized right. And another thing is, if the budget goes over, what are they going to cut? Godley got in the habit of cutting out things like roofing repairs, HVAC, upgrades to very, very old schools, plumbing, flooring, all kinds of very big needs. And they kept their beautiful stadium, their beautiful basketball arena, and they kept all their bells and whistles, and they didn't take care of the stuff. I think you might get more support if you can somehow put on paper that the actual needs of what's really, really in bad disrepair is going to be taken care of before some of the other stuff here. So just something to consider, Joshua ISD. And you guys did stand up a long-range facility planning committee. I want you to think about running that all the time, not standing up one that is always driving towards a bond. There's always a need to know what your future may be, but it really looks like these are just insulating entities to kind of shade the elected officials to make a decision for a bond, because they never don't recommend a bond. So either just call it a bond committee, or really look at long range stuff all the time, if that makes sense. And hopefully you guys had some, antagonists, some people that are knowingly against the bond. There was plenty of them after the last bond, because you want to get their buy-in. You should be able to sell this bond and why the district needs it to all the people. Now, if people are just going to not support it no matter what, well, it is what it is. But be the bigger person, Joshua ISD, and pull in some antagonists and really try to explain to them why you feel you need this type of money and you're willing to go in debt for it. Also, the INS rate will be maxed at 50 cents per 100. You can go above that, but it's really difficult, and it is really bad if you go above it for future bonds. But how is that going to affect future growth and limitations within Joshua ISD? For example, Godley ISD is maxed at 50 cents right now, and they're literally telling people, we're lucky we're maxed because we can't go any higher than that. Well, they're using tier 1 foundation school funds to pay off bond debt. That's teacher pay, that's curriculum pay, that's more service oriented, and they're having to divert some of their tier 1 funds to pay for that. So how are you limiting yourself by raising your INS rate this much? Because you're going to need new schools down the road at some point, most likely, right, Joshua? So let's talk about that piece too, and not allow people to think that this bond will be the last, because it probably won't. So that's enough about Joshua. If you're a bond protagonist or antagonist, we'd love to have you on in the words of the college football epicenter coach Deion Sanders, now ain't hard to find. So if you're a Facebook warrior and you want to talk on Facebook and LOL everybody, come on the show, answer the tough questions here. If you're pro or anti-bond, come make your case. If you want to talk why we shouldn't pass this bond, or you want to sell why we should, come on the show. Come one, come all. We're ready to hear from you. Gosh, I hope we can get to the mud today. seriously, we really, really need to think about anytime you're going to add debt long term. You really need to think about it. Bonds are the primary mechanism to fund new facilities. Not the only, but the main one, the primary one, the easiest one. But that should never be used as a, well, this is how it's always been. This is what we have to do. And taxpayer money needs to be respected. Joshua's finances are fairly conservative. They're not out of whack. Like Godley's has been mismanaged so poorly. I don't know how they can ever earn anybody's trust except for people that just want blank checks to do the biggest, baddest stuff for their kids, regardless of what it costs. But Joshua hasn't gotten to that point yet. But I really hope to see them come out and line item this and really start to begin to allow some deep dive into the specifics of this bond. And they have an opportunity coming up. They have two, Facebook Live and an in-person one on the 27th and 28th of September. Hopefully they'll have many more. All right, that's a whole lot of talking. On to the city of Godley. So what's going on with the city of Godley other than they're pretty much they've been paralyzed with inaction. They really haven't gotten a lot accomplished. They did have a meeting on Tuesday before the MUD meeting in Cleburne, and it looks like they're finally going to get around to passing and ratifying a budget and setting a tax rate. This is super, super, super important. There's massive consequences for them not passing a tax rate. So the no new revenue rate, which is basically last year's amount of money, they'll default to that. And if they need more money as they expand, they're basically handcuffing themselves. So they really, really need to get to this point. It looks like they're going to beat the deadline, which is good. But, boy, talk about by the skin of your teeth. The city administrator job. They still haven't hired a city administrator. They're still fiddle farting around with this. It's been, this new council's been there since May. We've been without a city Godley's been without a city administrator since I think it's either early January or late December. When he walked out, they've had numerous opportunities to bring interims in to hire. They're not doing it. They can't pull that trigger. You need to get, every day that full-time staff is not in place is multiple days to get caught up. Misty, Michael Papafus, Misty Rodriguez, they've been going down there. Props to them. It's not their job, but they really need to get the right people in place. Back on this police thing. This ain't dying. Godley, the police thing ain't dying. The reality is the city council has proven that they're a city council of political will, not of law and order. They allowed political will for whatever reason to drive accountability. They're setting a police precedence that the police can either be grossly incompetent or criminal without recourse. You've emboldened them. There were allegations that they went after the former chief, Jason Jordan, for promotions. They got promoted. Whether that occurred or not, I don't know. But those allegations have been floating out there for a long time. Now there's allegations that Sergeant Arbuthnot is either horribly incompetent or criminal in how he wrote the affidavit on Jen Thompson to get arrested. How did that happen? Okay. An incident happened at Godley City Council or at City of Godley on the 22nd of December. That resulted in a city council person doing something that Texas Municipal League said she could do. She had done due diligence and trying to find out if that was within her scope. She was told it was by the legal advising body, and that's what she did. So what happened with that? The secretary didn't put on there what a councilwoman wanted, so she filed a complaint against the secretary. Police tried to strong arm her and threaten that they would walk out and potentially file a lawsuit. So she filed a complaint against 3 officers, Cantrell, Arbuthnot, Amatoya. Later on, Jessica Hill, the secretary, filed a complaint at some point. That complaint that she filed references stuff that happened after the time Arbuthnot said he interviewed the secretary. You can't comment on something that technically hasn't happened yet. It was either a mistake or it was intentional. And it happened to be moved in front of all the complaints. You see, if somebody files a complaint after they've had a complaint filed on them, it can be considered retaliation. So if you move that complaint up, you eliminate that. This is really, really easy to solve. Nobody knows what happened except for a couple of those cops and Miss Hill. Ask Arbuthnot, show me your report. When did you interview Miss Hill? Ask Templar, show me your written report. When did you interview Miss Hill? Ask Miss Hill, when were you interviewed by Godley PD? If it was a mistake due to incompetency, apologize for it, move on. If I'm wrong in making these, I will go down and apologize wholeheartedly to those individuals as much as I can. We don't know what happened. It'll come out in time. No question about it. But all they need to do is ask a couple of questions to a couple of people to get to the bottom of this. You can't allow people that have the powers of police to abuse that power. You can't allow them to not dot all their I's and cross all their T's if it's going to cause somebody to go to jail. Police officers are upheld to a very, very, very high standard. There's a responsibility that comes with that, but the powers that they're granted, a responsibility comes with that. If that trust is violated, that's not good. I was a police officer. I worked with dirty officers. I have a guy I worked with who had to do federal time, go to federal prison. I'm telling you right now, it is super, super easy because of the protections a police officer, law enforcement officer has to abuse that power. It takes an honest, disciplined individual to do the right thing at the right time when nobody's looking. And it's hard to do sometimes. Over a long period of time, there's a substantial smoke that these cops have been used as a political weapon. They targeted council members. They targeted political people that were running for office. There's a lot of smoke about that stuff. This is a pattern. This isn't a singular event. These questions need to be answered. You want to talk about not holding people accountable for the sins of their father? You can't heal without fixing the problem. All that you've done is picked a scab on what was a healing wound. Right after this happened, an individual is promoted to sergeant. Somebody needs to go look at Godley's general orders and find out what it takes to promote to sergeant. Because what it takes is a very public process of what's required, who's eligible, when the tests are, over a period of time, and all officers are eligible to do it. Did that happen? Or was somebody rewarded for doing something? Well, we don't know. We don't know. These are big questions that need to be answered. This is a public trust issue. This isn't about how good somebody hangs out with you while your pig gets out of your yard. This isn't about how good it is when your kid walks by and they give them a piece of candy. This is about if a police officer is going to be corrupted by people for personal gain. Are they subject to being led down a path that violates their oath? Do they not take their job seriously enough to double check everything to where they make mistakes that cost people their civil rights? This is not going away, Godley. I'm telling you right now. It might take a long time, and it's sad because now it's another cloud. Templar needs to be talked to about when he had interviewed Miss Hill. Miss Hill needs to be talked to about when she was interviewed, and Arbuthnot needs to be asked when he was interviewed. And all the reports need to be looked at because they're all signed, they're all dated. That's how police officers do work. And if those aren't available, the question's why. Oh, and Templar was on probation. He was only an officer for a month. Who was this field training officer? Yeah, go check the field training officer program at Godley too. See if that was followed. Later, Johnson County. We'll be back with you next week and we'll get into muds. Sorry we didn't get there this week. Get on with your bad self, Godley. Good day.
From Burleson to Venus and Grandview to Godley, this is the voice of Johnson County, Joco Community Radio.